1998. I was, I guess, basically a charter member, and I've had a number of positions in the club through, I guess, the last 25 years. Currently, for the last several years, I've been doing conservation work, closely associated with the Department of Fish and Wildlife here in Kentucky. I guess in that capacity, I spend most of my time, free time, spring, summer, and fall, searching for snakes, collecting data. Through that time, since I actually started keeping notes back in 2003, at this point I've made roughly 12,000 live snake observations in the state. So I canvass the state from one end to the other, collecting information and also trying to learn what I can about the distribution of reptiles in Kentucky, and also making natural history observations. So at any rate, this presentation here is a composite of the 33 species of snakes in the state. Next slide here. Could you guys operate that to me? I'd appreciate it. I'm afraid I'll delete the slides. Yeah. Actually, I've never messed much with the laptop, so this is a little bit. Appreciate it. Yeah, I guess any information like this, in my opinion, should start with a look at places these animals call home. So there you go. This is, I start off with a series of habitat photographs. This right here is a photograph taken atop Little Black Mountain in Harlan County, Kentucky, in the Cumberland Mountains. Next slide. There you go. This is in the hill country of eastern Kentucky in Breathitt County. This is basically the foothills before you get to the Cumberland Mountains. Next slide. Oh, there we go. On the other end of the state, this right here is a view from Fulton County, Kentucky, along the Mississippi River corridor. A lot of people probably are not aware that Kentucky actually has some outstanding swamps, very classical in a sense. This right here, one of the things I like about Kentucky is there's a diversity of habitats from east to west, and in between for that matter, with a relatively low population density of humans. Next slide. Another look at one of these western Kentucky swamps. This one here is in Ballard County, Kentucky, not far from the confluence of the Ohio-Mississippi rivers. Next slide. This is more towards the interior. This is a scene I like to see. This is a forested situation with large rock piles. Snakes like to find these clearings in the forest, particularly pit vipers. Next slide. And this is a look at an oak and pine forest. Another interesting habitat type here in Kentucky. And this is a look also beyond the swamps. We also have a generous portion of clear flowing streams through forested areas, and lots of snakes like to utilize this type of habitat actually in and around these streams. And this is a view that I like seeing. This shows classical, what I refer to as edge habitat. This is where various habitat types actually merge together. This is an upland field in a forest, and the open canopy provides an opportunity for snakes to thermoregulate to further biological needs such as gestating young and digesting mills. So this is, and also it harbors a great variety of prey for snakes as well. Next slide. And a place I spend lots and lots of time, oak and hickory forest. This is the typical view of walking through the woods here in Kentucky. Next slide, please. All right, I guess I'm going to start with what I like to refer to as the smaller fossorial species of snakes. This right here is an inconspicuous snake, yet relatively common throughout the state. Actually, I would say it is common. It's all through forested habitats throughout the state. This is the worm snake. They typically don't grow no larger than 10 inches. They spend most of their time beneath the ground, feeding on earthworms and maybe small grubs, things like that. These are egg layers, laying maybe 3 eggs or so in the midsummer. And if a female is gravid, you can actually see the eggs through the translucent belly scales on the ventral. Next slide, please. One of the most abundant, possibly the most abundant snake in the state is the ringneck snake. We actually have two. We got the northern ringneck snake, and we have the Mississippi ringneck snake. These snakes are very common throughout the state in practically all regions, provided it's not wet. You don't see them in wet and the swamp habitats, but along the edges you will, and every type of forest habitat. These snakes typically are less than a foot long, but on a rare occasion you can see them as much as 15 inches or so. They feed upon predominantly on earthworms and grubs, but they will also feed on some of the forest salamanders, the smaller types, typically of the genus Plethodon. Next, please. Smooth earth snake. This is a rather nondescript species, very small live bearer. I don't know if I've ever seen one past 10 inches long. Not quite as common as ringneck snake for sure. They are very inconspicuous. They spend much of their time beneath ground, occasionally coming up after like generous rainfall events, like particularly in the spring. This one here is actually a gravid female. She was actually, when I seen her, she was up towards the surface after a spring rain, and she was trying to get some additional warmth for her babies. Next slide, please. This is the decay snake. This snake here is relatively common throughout the state. I've noticed that they typically, not always, but typically are around the margins of places where there's water features, quite commonly. This here is also a gravid female. You can see how thick she is. Another live bearer. And they typically feed on invertebrates, although I do suspect that maybe on occasion they might take the small upland chorus frog or cricket frog, some of the larger ones. Next, please. Northern red belly snake. The same genus as the decay snake, although not nearly as common. These snakes are forest snakes, and again, like these other smaller fossorial species, you typically see them seasonally after rains. During the drier seasons, when it starts getting really warm and dry in the summer, you seldom see them. And if you do, they might be about on maybe blacktop roads at nighttime. This is a snake that feeds on grubs and things like that, but it's also known to feed quite often on slugs, which is kind of neat. They have a multitude of color phases. Most are anywhere between gray to maybe a brown to a burnt orange, and various shades in between, sometimes with vertebral stripes going down. Another small species, the literature says they can get as big as 15 inches, but I don't think I've ever seen one past maybe 10. Next, please. And this is the last of the small fossorial species, and by far the least common. In fact, I would say probably the rarest, the southeastern crown snake. These snakes, I've only seen them actually in 3 counties. I've seen them in Callaway, Trigg, and Lyon counties in West Kentucky. They prefer what they call xeric microhabitats, very dry, well-drained soil. The ones that I've seen have been out on the road, usually very, very late at night on blacktops or occasionally undercover. They're kind of interesting because even though they're a small species of around 10 inches long, they're known to feed predominantly on centipedes, which is pretty neat. I'd like to come across that sometime in the wild, seeing one feeding on a centipede. That'd be pretty cool. Next frame, please. Northern scarlet snake. This is a snake that's got a rather curious distribution through the state. Rather spotty, actually. Most of the current records, or the most recent records, have occurred in the western portion of the state around the Land Between the Lakes area. This snake here is also strictly nocturnal, very secretive. You can see the snout is a little bit pointed there, where they kind of dig around through loose soil. And their main food actually is reptile eggs. So they like to look around for the eggs of lizards and turtles and things like that. Also snakes, they come across them. But it's a snake that's considered to be pretty rare here in the state. All right, next snake here is a snake that probably a lot of y'all have seen. This is the queen snake, and it's another dietary specialist. It feeds predominantly upon freshly molted crawdads, and they live in the central portions of the state in limestone creeks, usually with running water. Where they exist, they're pretty common, and typically they'll be in the water or under the flat stones along the edges of the creek itself. Next slide, please. This is the Kirtland snake. This is another snake with a very interesting range distribution. This is, I guess, once they did the taxonomy revision some years back, they put this snake into a genus by itself, which makes it what they call a monotypic genus. So it's the only species in that genus, which makes it of special significance. And the thing is this snake, the biggest populations are known to be in Louisville, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis. So they're typically in these urban and suburban settings, which makes it particularly difficult to affect conservation strategies for this snake. There is also in Kentucky a couple of other smaller populations, but most of the ones, this is a snake actually, I guess, grown up in Jefferson County, I've seen fairly often. So I haven't seen one for several years, so that was one of the things I wanted to do next year is I wanted to try to target and sample some populations here, maybe update some photographs and collect some information on them. This snake, it's a small snake, typically no more than 18 inches on average. They have the reddish coloration on the belly, and they feed basically on night crawlers and earthworms. Next, please. All right, this is a snake that's probably familiar with most everybody. This is the eastern garter snake. Lives probably, well, no doubt, it lives in every county in the state. They typically are found closer to aquatic situations, but not always. I've also seen them up on dry ridges and places like that. There's places where the snake is relatively uncommon, and there's places where they're absolutely abundant. There's 3 species in the Thamnophis genus here in Kentucky. This is by far the most common, the eastern garter snake. Lots and lots of variation. In fact, I could probably do a presentation on these snakes alone, showing 30 different looks with 30 different snakes. But next slide, please. Another member of this genus is the eastern ribbon snake. Much more spotty in distribution, definitely more thoroughly aquatic than the eastern garter snake. These snakes are always firmly associated with wetlands, and quite often they're confused. Quite often people actually confuse garter snakes with ribbon snakes, thinking that the garter snake that they saw is a ribbon, but they're actually very easy to differentiate. You can see in front of the eye there, you can see a little bar. Ribbon snakes have that, and garter snakes do not. And also, you can see on the labial scales on the lips are unpatterned on the ribbon snakes. And the eastern garter snake always has bars on the labial scales. And like the eastern garter snake, these are also live bearers, producing their young usually in midsummer. And these snakes, they feed on usually minnows and small frogs, which garter snakes will also eat, but they also incorporate earthworms and other small invertebrates. Next slide, please. And the third member of this genus in Kentucky is the western ribbon snake. They have a very limited distribution along the Mississippi River, for the most part in Fulton County, Kentucky. Where they're found, I would consider them very common. You can differentiate these from the eastern ribbon snake. If you look and you see on the crown of the snake where the parietal scales are, you can see a marking, and the western ribbon snakes will have these paired spots, whereas the eastern ribbon snake we just saw lacks those, or if they do, they're very, very small and very indistinct. Like the eastern ribbon snake, likes to feed on minnows and small frogs. Next, please. All right, this right here is the first of the what we call the Nerodia complex snakes, the water snakes. This is in fact, someone has told me here recently, and I haven't seen the paper on it, but somebody has said that they now are simply referring to these all as the common water snake. And formerly, this was known as the northern water snake, Nerodia sipodon, the dominant form. But this snake's often mistaken for copperheads and cottonmouth and whatnot. They have heavily keeled scales. They can be thick-bodied, and they can look intimidating to people who are basically afraid of snakes. But they're totally harmless, and this particular type will live in just about any type of water body, whether it be a stream, a creek, a pond, a lake, very common. They can basically utilize almost any aquatic habitat in the state. Next, please. And this is the Midland. This is the Floralis. This is what used to be the subspecies. It might swing back to that direction. I had to read the paper, like I say, but That's Nerodia cipodon pluralis, and these live in the western portion of Kentucky, and they're typically a little bit brighter colored than the northerns, and you can see the dorsal blotching is smaller in number. Next, please. This here is a plain belly water snake. In Kentucky, we have two forms. We have the copper belly water snake and the yellow belly water snake, Nerodia erythrogaster neglecta and Nerodia erythrogaster flabbergaster. Most, I think, are intermediates or intergrades. Of the water snakes themselves, I believe these to be the most terrestrial, and it's not uncommon for me to see these some distance away from water. I've seen them in places, in fact, that I just didn't think a water snake would be. So they'll roam far and wide, typically looking for frogs seems to be their main prey. Next, please. The largest of the water snakes, this is the diamondback water snake. Very impressive snake. I've seen them like well over 5 foot long, very thick. This one here was in Henderson County, very memorable. I was hoping to find one that day. Seen a lot of snakes, eastern ribbons and copper belly water snakes and garter snakes and whatnot. And towards the end of the day, we was traversing a grassy dike that bisected 2 sections of swamp, and this snake was out. And I wanted pictures, and so I grabbed onto her. And I would say, like, I don't want to overplay it, but of all the snake bites I've ever received, it was the one that was the most significant. Yeah, they have large fish hook type teeth, and yeah, she tore into me pretty good, and I was digging teeth after about 6 months. But nonetheless, I was happy. I got a picture of it. So, I mean, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. But they're neat snakes. They typically are found around permanent water sources, unlike some of these others. So they're like a big, robust snake. Probably my favorite of the water snakes, actually. Next, please. Broad-banded water snake. This is a subspecies of the southern water snake, Fasciata, from down south. They extend their range barely into Kentucky, only into Fulton County and the Reelfoot Lake area. Where they live, they are relatively common. I've seen as many as 22 in one day, which is pretty neat. They're a beautiful snake. Oftentimes the ventral has got a red coloration to it. But one thing that's kind of neat about this, we was out one time, it must have been about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and there had been some rain, so there was a flooded ag field with a bunch of minnows that had been up to the field in shallow water. So I'm shining lights, and I saw where these snakes they was actually using their coils to corral the minnows in, and the minnows was trapped, and it was just like taking their time and just plucking them out. It was pretty cool. So relatively advanced behavior. Next slide, please. This is by far the rarest of the water snakes in Kentucky. This is the Mississippi green water snake. Of the 12,000 snakes that I've seen, only 2 have been Mississippi green water snakes, and this is the only one I got my hands on. And it's a rough-looking snake. Needed to have a shed, but it's really kind of a nondescript snake. One of the things that really differentiates it from the other species, you really can't hardly see in this picture, but below the eye, there's a small row of scales under the eye, between the eye and the labial scales. But they have a very limited range here in Kentucky. And but anyhow, that is all the water snakes. Next slide, please. All right, this is one of my favorite snakes. This is the western mud snake, and I always say that whenever I see one of these, I'm in a place that's very special, very unique. It's a true swamp habitat. It's a large, beautiful snake. It's very secretive. It spends a lot of its time in the emergent vegetation, in the swamps, and down in burrows. And it feeds, as another dietary specialist, it feeds upon the large aquatic salamanders of the genuses Siren and Anthuma. So in order to have a population of mud snakes, you have to have that food base there. But most of the ones I've seen have either been crossing the road at nighttime or under cover that I had strategically placed out. But this right here was one actually we seen last year. This is a gravid female. Excuse me, but yeah, just a really unique and special animal. Egg layer, I should mention that, which is kind of unusual. Most of the snakes that live in swamp areas actually are live bearers. About that, I'm talking about the ribbon snakes, They have the water snakes, the cottonmouth. This snake actually is an egg layer, which is interesting. And the female will stay with the eggs until they hatch. It's kind of neat. Next slide, please. Yeah, this right here is the black racer. For the most part, we have the southern black racer in Kentucky. If you go to the eastern part of the state, you have in the Cumberland Mountains, and a little bit north of there, you'll have the northern racer. This is definitely a dietary generalist. They will eat anything they can overpower. This is a snake that is also very terrestrial, but it's also a diurnal animal, which it's active during the day. It's got a very high metabolism. It's out on the search for food all the time. It's a visually oriented sight predator. So it's extremely successful. It utilizes practically every habitat we have here in Kentucky. It won't be deep in the swamps, but I found them right there, literally on the edge of the swamps. I found them on the tops of mountains, fields, forests, edge habitat. It is definitely, in fact, in 2022, it was the most common species I observed, but definitely a very successful animal. Next, please. The rough green snake. Yeah, this is a beautiful species that I wish I saw more of. It's an insectivore, which feeds upon soft-bodied caterpillars and spiders and crickets and things like that. And it's been surmised that at one time these snakes were much more abundant, and that the widespread use of insecticides have probably had a negative impact on their populations. That said, they are found in every county in the state of Kentucky. It's interesting also, when they are, sometimes you see them dead on the road, unfortunately, and they will change colors from green to blue. And what happens is the chromatophores in the body, the skin, it changes the complexity of it, and the animals will lose this greenish coloration. But they are like a very, what they refer to as an arboreal species, spend lots of time off the ground. They're very inconspicuous. They blend in with the foliage. And so every once in a while, when I've seen one up off the ground in the low limbs of a tree, I literally almost had to run right into it. It's like they blend in so well. Occasionally, I'll see one that's on the ground, or maybe it fell out of a tree, and there it is. But just beautiful snakes. Next, please. Eastern hognose snake. This is a snake a lot of people really enjoy seeing, including myself. This is lots of variation in color and pattern. This one here is doing part of the defensive mechanism threat display. You see that it's got a hood that it's actually spreading. And these snakes here, they go through an entire routine, and sometimes they go through it rapidly, other times it takes a while for them to get from point A to point Z. But typically, they'll start off and they'll kind of blow air and they'll spread their hood. If that doesn't work, they might barf up their last meal, which is usually going to be a toad. And if that doesn't work, they'll flip over on their belly and play dead and stick their tongue out of their mouth. But they're very neat. They're an upland species, feeding predominantly on toads, which they're uniquely built to do. They have an adrenal gland 9 times larger than the typical snake, and they have large teeth in the back of their mouths that they use to puncture the toads, because the toads, as a defense, they have toxic secretions on their skin, but they also will inhale air and blow themselves up. The hognose snake, they can handle the toxins and they can deflate the toad. So that's what they enjoy eating. Next slide, please. And like I said, lots of variation. Really, most of the ones that I do see in the state are black, or what you would call the melanistic phase. But it's always fun because you don't know what you're going to get with a hognose snake, and even though they're widespread, they're not particularly common. I bet I've seen about as many in the state as just about anybody. But at the same time, it's like, these days it seems like I don't see as many as I used to. If I see like a handful anymore, I feel really good about it. Used to be just so happy we spent a lot of time in areas where they were most common. So we had the opportunity to see lots and lots of variation with this snake. But next slide, please. This is another very familiar snake. I would imagine most of you guys have seen these before. This is the rat snake. And it's another snake that spends a lot of time off the ground. Oftentimes see these up in trees or in the rafters of barns, but they feed upon birds and they feed upon mammals. They get big. It's not uncommon to see one 6 foot, and I've probably seen a few that was approaching 7 foot. They have the ability to traverse vertical type situations. If you look at them, their bellies are it's almost like they're shaped like a loaf of bread. So they just undulate their way right on up. And I guess most recently they referred to these snakes as the gray rat snake. Wasn't too long ago they called them the Midland rat snake, and before that the black rat snake. So, I don't get too hung up on this type of common name taxonomy and the latest revision. To me, there's a huge amount of diversity from one end of the state to the other, and this is just one example. Again, I could probably do a presentation on the many different looks of rat snakes across the state of Kentucky, because it's almost like a bag of marbles. You don't know exactly what you're going to see. But just really neat snakes, though, and every county in Kentucky has got records of this species. So, all right, next slide, please. Another member of this genus is the corn snake. And the corn snake has got a very interesting distribution in the state of Kentucky. It actually occurs in 2 relic populations. One of those is out around the Natural Bridge area of the Daniel Boone National Forest. The other, and the one that I'm most familiar with, is the Mammoth Cave region, which is where this animal was found and photographed. These animals, I had a particular interest in these, and me and the guy that I used to hang out with for a long time, Will Bird, we wanted to discover what we could about this animal, learn more about it. At that time, the literature was very sparse as far as records and whatnot. So we dedicated several years to find these snakes, and ultimately we published a paper in the Journal of North American Herpetology with all the meristical data and morphometric data we collected on this animal, which was with the help, gratefully, of Dana Boxley with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. Actually, without her, we never would have done it. She was a PhD, and she knew how to do those things that we couldn't do. We could collect the data, but we didn't know how to process it into a tangible format to get it published. They're really neat snakes. They're colorful, got a checkerboard belly. Like the rat snake, it feeds a whole lot on birds and mammals. The ones we have here show quite a bit of variation. This one here is more towards the more colorful end. Some are darker with a kind of a charcoal wash to them. All of them are very interesting, though. It looks like, I guess, where they live, in my opinion, I guess at least, and I guess this is based on seeing roughly 160 individuals now. They seem like they are they're moderately successful here in the south central part of the state, utilizing some of these areas where light agriculture takes place. And they seem to utilize these edge habitats there. So, but anyhow, I guess a lot of this country down here now is like owned by Amish people. So we've been able to get on some of those properties and survey for these snakes. So anyhow, next slide, please. All right, this is an introduction to the genus Lampropeltis, which is another one of my favorite groups. I have a lot of favorite groups, I guess. But this right here is an eastern black king snake, which are just amazing animals. They definitely really are one of my favorite. These snakes, they feed upon pretty much anything they can overcome and overpower, but they are also well known to be immune to the venom of our native pit vipers. And I've found them in the wild, actually feeding on copperheads and whatnot. There's been studies done, and they are the most powerful constrictor in the world for their size, based upon laboratory testing and whatnot. The king snake of Kentucky is successful. It lives in most of the state, minus some small areas in the bluegrass. Also, I was very pleased that we was able to find the largest specimen of eastern black king snake that's been recorded. It was in Hopkins County, Kentucky. It was 60.13 inches long. And it was kind of neat because usually, like when you have records on snakes like that, they have to be euthanized and put into a pickle jar, which was unacceptable. We didn't want to do that. So we talked with the Center of North American Herpetology. We talked with the Louisville Zoo, and we reached a compromise. And what we did is we went ahead to the zoo vets actually anesthetized the snake. We got the measurement. It was authenticated. We had it published in a peer-reviewed journal. and accepted as the new record, and we was able to release the snake. So we was real happy about that. But okay, next slide. Also, I guess in the far western part of the state, along the Mississippi River, again, this would be in Fulton County, Carlisle County, Hickman County, we have intergrades with the speckled king snake. You can see the interband speckling on this specimen here. In my opinion, they're intergrades, in the opinion of a lot of field herpetologists that agree with me. The most published work on this snake by a guy named Burbrink, I think back in 2009, they were saying that the Mississippi River was a barrier to genetic dispersal, and the fact that the snakes looked identical on either side of the Mississippi River was simply a matter of convergent evolution, where the habitat provided selective pressure for certain phenotypes of snakes. And the thing is, they never really adequately sampled the contact zones, so they're surmising this based upon pretty much nothing, when I think anybody with any experience in the field recognizes the fact that snakes can swim. And the fact that the snakes on one side of the Mississippi River look just like the ones on the other, yeah, I'd say pretty much there's genetic influence of Holbrook eye, the speckled king snake. But it's another interesting variation here in the state of Kentucky. Next slide, please. Another common species of Lampropeltis is the eastern milk snake. You can see on the nape there, there's a lot of times they'll have like a Y configuration. This one has like some semblance of a Y, but this is a very typical eastern milk snake. It's got the chestnut brown markings, the kind of grayish background, large blotch count, or a large number of blotch count. It's got distinct lateral blotching on it. These snakes are particularly common in the bluegrass region and eastern Kentucky, but they're also common pretty much about anywhere outside of the western Coalfield. These snakes here, they don't get as large as the king snakes, but they're similar in that they are also powerful constrictors, and they mainly feed upon other reptiles and rodents. Next slide, please. And there's variation. This is one that's, this is actually a large male. Sometimes snakes will lose coloration as they get older. These don't, but this is a large male. You can see the configuration there on the nape of the neck there. About large, I'm saying the snake was like probably a solid 3 foot. I've seen eastern milks probably near 4 foot, which is very, very large, but this was a nice sized male. Next slide, please. And this is the other form of milk snake in Kentucky, and this is one that no longer exists, they say. Again, this is like, this is in the Jackson Purchase. This animal was in Hickman County, Kentucky, and the latest revisions are saying that every milk snake in Kentucky now is an eastern milk snake. And again, you can look at this snake here and see that it's vastly different. And aside from the color red, you can see there's a reduction or an absence of lateral blotching. You can see also the dorsal blotches are much fewer in number. And on the neck, you can see a very distinctive collar. So this is a textbook example of a red milk snake. And in fact, I teach some of these biologist friends of mine. I tell them, I said, if such a thing actually exists as a red milk snake, I mean, this is a classic example. And it is what it is. But yeah, quite often in science, they're using a lot of molecular DNA analysis, and the biggest problem is the interpretation of it, but also the fact that quite often they don't adequately sample the different populations, and that's just the way it is. You can look through the papers and you can see what the animals are, and there was not a single animal sampled in this area. This is a red milk snake. Next slide, please. Okay, there's another one. This is Carlisle County, Kentucky, not far from the Mississippi River. Just totally beautiful animals. They're a little bit smaller than the eastern milk, but these guys, they feed heavily on other reptiles and also on relatively small rodents like voles and maybe like the white-footed mouse and deer mouse, things like that. Next slide, please. All right, the prairie king snake. This is a neat snake. They're a large, robust species, very terrestrial. They occur in Kentucky from an area roughly southern Louisville down to the southern part of the state, westward, minus the western Coalfield. And they don't go into the western Coalfield much because it's, for the most part, its lower elevation and seasonal flooding. And this is very much an animal that prefers old field habitat, open canopy. Ours population of prairie king snakes is quite different than ones you would see, for instance, like in Kansas or maybe Nebraska or something. Theirs are much smaller, they're more colorful, higher contrast. Ours, which I refer to as the eastern forest variety, are darker, more robust, thick animals, very hardy. And also, I guess as an aside, we also found the largest prairie king snake known to science, and that was 56.5 inches. We went through the same process going through the zoo, the CNAH, to get that certified. That was in Edmonson County, Kentucky. But just a really neat snake, just like I say, a very robust, thick animals, and really one of the very few species that I actually will observe living in the company of black king snakes. So that speaks a whole lot. Most other species of snakes, when you have areas where black king snakes live, they try to avoid them. Next one, please. All right, the last member of the Lampropeltis genus is the scarlet king snake. And we're very fortunate to have a population of these, actually maybe several. I should preface that by saying in the eastern part of the state, there's well-documented records. They are all historically very old and have not been seen for quite some time. A friend of mine actually is hot on the trail of that, and he's hoping to have a breakthrough, so we'll see how that plays out this year. All the ones that I've seen have been in Trigg County and Lyon County, which is pretty much, it's the northern extent of this snake's range. It's definitely a snake of the southeast. A very beautiful snake, small. I've never seen one bigger than probably 15 or 16 inches long. They are definitely a nocturnal species. They feed predominantly on skinks, which are small lizards in the forest. But always nice to see. Most of the ones I see are either like in places where I've set up artificial cover with these in mind, or occasionally I'll see them like on a road crossing and on a summer night, sometimes as late as 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. But a beautiful little snake. Next, please. And there's another example. Yeah, these guys, you can see the red snout. A lot of people would confuse these further south where the eastern coral snake lives, but we don't have eastern coral snakes in Kentucky, so there's nothing to really compare or contrast to. And next, please. All right, this right here is a northern pine snake. This was from Edmonson County, Kentucky, not far from Mammoth Cave National Park. And definitely, if not the most significant find that I've ever been associated with, it's one of like A or B. But basically, yeah, this right here was an animal that we had targeted for a number of years, and we actually was very concerned that that particular population had been extirpated since there hadn't been an actual record for since the 1960s. And we targeted this species. We looked for it every available opportunity. We would go down in the wintertime actually and go to the little general store where the old man was sitting around the pickle barrel playing checkers, and we'd make friends and we'd get access to properties. And one thing that really concerned me was the fact that the only people who was even familiar with this snake was the guys that was like 70 and 80 years old. And this is people that spend a lot of time out in the woods. It's definitely a hunting culture, a lot of deer hunters, turkey hunters. And the old people, they knew exactly what it was. I give them just enough information and then let them kind of run with it. They say, yeah, they call them like yellow bull snakes. And this snake's got a modified epiglottis that is a defensive mechanism. It excels air, and it's very loud actually. And if you're not looking for it, it's definitely something that's going to get your attention. But they have for the most part, a very subterranean existence. They live a very secretive life. So even where they do live, they're very, very seldom seen. But yeah, this snake here, just an awesome snake. They're a very powerful constrictor. They'll feed on, I would say everything from like, gosh, probably looking at small to mid-sized rabbits to wood rats, moles, voles, anything like that. I'm sure opportunistically they would also feed upon birds, especially ground nesting birds like quail. But historically they occurred in 3 populations in the state. The ones in the east which actually there was the guys from Touchstone Energy had spent, gosh, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years probably looking for them extensively with funnel traps and artificial cover sites, and they did not locate one. And the last one that was verified from that population was 1984. And so we got, that population is very much suspect. We don't know if they even exist anymore. This is the one from the Mammoth Cave region. Most of the ones that have been found in recent times have been in the Tennessee Valley River population out around Callaway County, Trigg County, Lyon County. And usually every several years, one will turn up out there, either a dead on the road or a live individual. That you might go longer stretches without seeing any. We seen one in Callaway County in 2002. This one here was 11th of June 2006, and it was a day I remember very, very well. It was very surreal. It was a very hot day, and we started off, and I remember we found 44 animals that day, 44 snakes, which really wasn't really all that many back in those days. But the thing that got me the most is there was 16 different species, so the diversity was really pretty pronounced. And there was a site that we had the snake in mind. It had the look of perfect habitat, and we was kind of saving it for last because the day got real hot. So we spent a good portion of the day basically just kind of riding around, and then all of a sudden everything changed. The weather changed. There was you could see clouds rolling in, then a storm was coming in, and just so happens we also like timber rattlesnakes a whole lot, and timber rattlesnakes don't like to get wet. So we had some large cover boards out, and we thought, well, it's like these rattlesnakes, they know their home territory, they're intelligent animals. They might be going to these boards, and let's see if we can find some rattlesnakes, which we did. But we also flipped this guy here, and like I said, the trees were bending over, and there was claps of thunder, and it was just an amazing day. Next slide, please. And this is one from Callaway County, Kentucky. Okay, let's see. Next slide, please. And this goes into the venomous snakes, which I have a particular interest in the venomous snakes of Kentucky. This is a pair of northern copperheads. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a pair of northern copperheads copulating. I like to consider myself a person that's a student of snake behavior. There's always more to learn. It's like every year I learn something new, so I like to record information. I take notes. This time of year I like to go back and review my notes, and I look to see what was going on different dates, different weather conditions, different places. And at this juncture right here, this is these snakes actually will breed both in the spring and the fall. And I have many pictures of copperheads doing just this. I think this right here was like on May the 3rd. Next, please. And if you watch these snakes and observe and study them close enough, you'll see things like this right here, which is the female literally giving birth. And she is in the process. You can see on the upper right-hand side, you can see there's actually a baby in the membrane sac actually coming out her cloaca right now. And the other babies are actually still in their membrane sac. So she's like literally right there in the process of giving birth, which is pretty amazing. I like seeing stuff like that. That makes it for a special day. Next slide, please. And lots of variation. Copperheads are definitely by far and away the most numerous of the venomous snakes in Kentucky. Lots and lots of variation. This is just one I thought was very pretty, kind of almost a light colored kind of pastel look to it. Real nice looking snake. Next, please. Okay, this right here is, gosh, you know, Western Cottonmouth. It's like, love seeing these snakes. A lot of people don't. They're scared of them. I'm not. I like them. Wherever these snakes live, I know it's going to be an interesting place. You'll hear bird voice tree frogs, and you'll see some of the different water snakes and whatnot. But they like to live in places where there's buttonbush and cypress trees and tupelo and things like that. But they're a really rugged snake. They will feed upon anything they can basically put down their gullets, which is quite a bit. Usually it's more like amphibians and fish, but they'll also feed on birds and mammals, and they'll also feed on other snakes. Sometimes where there's drought, in fact, they'll be the last snake in a particular water hole because they'll eat the water snakes that they hang around. But this one here was in the Jackson Purchase. I thought it was a nice looking snake. Next one, please. And this is a baby. They're more contrasting in color, lighter. You can kind of see a little bit. If you look at the tail tip, you can kind of see it barely. I should have had a different picture of this, but they have a, like the copperhead, they'll have a, usually kind of a greenish or a yellow tail tip, which they use as a call to lure. And I've seen this many times too. You'd be there in the swamp like at nighttime, and these little snakes will wiggle their tail tip around, and it looks like a little caterpillar. So what's going on there is these, they're hoping to bring in like a tree frog or something like that so they can like get themselves a meal. But they're really cute at that size. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a big male. This is in the Western Coalfield. Another cottonmouth here. These snakes, they, like all snakes, so they're not aggressive, but they will defend themselves. You can see the namesake there, the white interior lining of the mouth. Yeah, these snakes, they're basically is this defensive mechanism, this threat display. They really just want to be left alone. So yeah, it's not like this snake is going to come at you and try to attack you or anything. So it's unfortunate wherever they live, they're persecuted by people, but they're just really neat snakes, I believe. Next slide, please. And my favorite snake to actually search for is the timber rattlesnake. And yeah, these snakes, gosh, this right here this was a great scene. This is, if you look at this is 5 female snakes. They're all gravid. This was under a 4x8 cover board we had at a study site. And what's neat about these snakes, they're apex predators, long-lived. Their natural reproductive biology is such to reflect that. These snakes typically do not become reproductively active until they're probably 6 to 8 years old. And then it takes so much out of the female as far as her energy reserves, they may only reproduce every 3rd year or so. However, they have a long lifespan. They live at least 30 years. And there are female rattlesnakes, since every one I see I photograph, and each one's markings are unique like a snowflake. You know, I could compare photographs and I can see if I've seen these different snakes before. And there's ones I've seen for probably very close to 2 decades. And I might not see them for a couple of years, then I'll see them. And when I see them, they're typically gravid at some of these rookeries. And these rookeries are places that are not like feeding grounds where most of the snakes might be at. These are places where the females, they're not feeding. Once the babies start taking up so much space in their bellies and in their bodies themselves, they no longer have the capacity to feed. So that's why it takes so long for them to reset the clock, up to like 3 years or so, until they actually have enough metabolic reserves to reproduce again. The breeding season is actually mid to late summer, and they will become gravid, maybe have a couple of mills over winter, wake up from the winter dormancy, and all through the spring and summer, they're at these rookeries, basically just gaining heat and letting their unborn babies develop. And then they'll give birth, usually late August to about the 3rd week of September. So next slide, please. And I've seen a lot of the times, I've been able to be fortunate enough to see females maybe several times in the summer and be there at the right time to see birth and babies. This is 2 females under a large piece of wood material we had out, and you can see the neonates there. So like the copperheads, like the cottonmouth, they will actually stay and guard their babies until the babies have their first shed, which is pretty neat, I think. It's actually, again, it's an advanced behavior. And that's something that's been a topic of a lot of discussion. I talked with John McGregor quite a bit, Department of Fish and Wildlife. We talk about all kinds of snake geek stuff like this, but yeah, sure enough, it's like being able to observe this, to record it in these species, and yeah, documentation. You know, it's like being out in the field making these observations, and that's how it's done. Next slide, please. Okay, this is one we found last year. Actually, this is a yellow phase. There's several different phases of timber rattlesnakes as far as color phase. I like this snake a whole lot. It was a big male.
Beautiful animal. The males, they get larger than the females. A lot of people don't understand this. But any snakes in which the males combat, the males get far larger. And that would be timber rattlesnakes. It would be actually all the venomous snakes, including all the echistrodons, which are the cottonmouths, the copperheads, the Lampropeltis, the Pituophis, the pine snakes, the rat snakes, the milk snakes, the king snakes. All those snakes, the males combat, and they all get larger. Conversely, the live bearers, like the garter snakes and the water snakes and whatnot, the females, it makes more sense for them, for the females, to get larger. Next slide, please. And to show some variation, there's another one. I like this particular look. It's got a little bit of a vertebral stripe going down. It's got the darker head coloration. This is another rattlesnake from last year. Enjoy seeing those. At this point, I have seen nearly 400 rattlesnakes in Kentucky, and I'll be real honest, there's no such thing as just another rattlesnake to me. I just enjoy each and every one, and when I'm out in the field and I see one, it just makes that a good day. Everything else is just gravy. I just like them so much. Next slide, please. Another one from last year. This is one that shows another bit of a variation. This is more of a grayer animal. It's got a little bit of the stripe going on. One thing that's kind of neat, this snake actually was under a piece of tin, and if you look at it, when you're doing surveys with some of these pit vipers, and particularly with timber rattlesnakes, they like the 3 points of contact. You can see the posterior end of the snake against the rock. You can see the mid-body portion against another rock. You can see where the neck is up there against another rock. They also like to rest with their heads in a 45-degree angle, which is pretty important. So I like to, when I'm surveying for rattlesnakes, I like to strategically place out the cover with the sun angle in mind, but also I like to have the crawl space beneath that the rattlesnakes seem to like. Next slide, please. Another nice snake here, another nice size male. Yeah, these snakes, they unlike the copperhead, they do not do well where there's a lot of human disturbance. Copperheads are much more forgiving in that regard. But these snakes, they like forested areas. They like to be left alone. They are actually, unfortunately, another one of those snakes. Most of the time when somebody sees one, they kill it. But they are, for the most part, a very laid-back animal. Again, they just want to be left alone. They could potentially be dangerous, of course, if you try to pick one up or whatnot. But quite often, rattlesnakes that I find won't even rattle, much less strike. So it's like it's amazing that people will persecute animals like this, when in fact they're just totally magnificent animals, actually. Next slide, please. Okay, I like rattlesnakes, like I say, so I'm just kind of throwing a few out here. This is another one. This is like one from a West Kentucky population. Just a big female. You can see how swollen the back end is. At this point, the young have already moved back to the distal end. And really like seeing that snake. Next one, please. Okay, this is one. This is from the mountains out in, I think I caught this one in Bell County. I've got a number of different slides of different black phase timber rattlesnakes, but you will see this phase out in the mountains. And so this was a gravid female, and this is the last snake of the day, as I recall, up on a ledge in Bell County. I spent quite a bit of time in Bell and Harlan counties. Really neat place. One thing that really surprised me is, of course, I'm sure everybody's aware that they've done a lot of strip mining out in the mountains, and it's very destructive to the natural habitats. There's no doubt about it, and there's also no doubt that a lot of the flora and fauna these regions have suffered as a result. But that said, these areas recover, and for some species of animals, they actually rebound, and it creates almost like an artificial oasis for these animals. And timber rattlesnakes, one of them, northern copperheads. See a lot of these snakes up on these old abandoned strip mines, like 15, 20 years after the operation shut down. You also see racers and garter snakes and eastern milks. Also, I see a lot of elk. I see a lot of black bear. So a lot of the megafauna actually really thrive in these areas on top of the mountains where the cap rock has been busted up, and you have big piles of rubble and rock, and you have thickets of blackberries and greenbrier and stuff like that. But a lot of animals actually utilizing that habitat. So I guess that's the upside of down if you want to look at the strip mining situation. But next picture, please. Yeah, this is a type. It's very similar to, I guess what we refer to down the deep south as the canebrake rattlesnake, and this fits that description quite a bit. We have these in Kentucky as well. This one was actually in southwestern Kentucky in Lyon County, and a very beautiful snake. Found this one crossing the road probably around midnight, a little bit after, and I remember when the headlights hit that snake, it just glowed. I just knew it was a beautiful snake. And not all of them look like this out there. There's variation. In fact, that's one thing that you can. Certain populations will have kind of a signature look with timber rattlesnakes, but even within those populations, there's going to be variation. You know, you can have a yellow phase, the black phase, lots of different looks, which is just only adds to the allure of this species. It's very interesting. Next slide, please. All right, this right here is the last snake of this presentation, and extremely significant for me. The western pygmy rattlesnake. This is one of the rarest, not just rarest snakes in the state of Kentucky, but literally one of the rarest animals in the state, represented by a scant handful of records over the last so many decades when it was discovered in the state. It only lives in small portions of 2 counties in West Kentucky. It's an animal that I had hoped to see for the last 20 some odd years, and I never saw. And I remember clearly last, I guess in 2021, the fall, I was sitting out there on our deck, and I got the fire pit going, man. I'm drinking me a bourbon, and I'm thinking like, man, like I ain't seen one of these, and I gotta see one of these snakes. And so I decided at that point to dedicate an entire week, if need be. And I wanted to learn everything I could about this species. So essentially, I had 2 data points that was on 2 roads that was relatively close together in the last 10 years. One was a live animal, one was a dead animal. And I utilized every resource I had available, scientific journals. I talked to different herpetologists in places where this snake is found. It's rare here in Kentucky, it's rare in Tennessee. It's very uncommon like in Missouri and Arkansas. It's a little more common in Oklahoma and North Texas. But I talked to a lot of different people, and what I came up with is these are very cryptic snakes with very small home ranges. They don't move a whole lot. And the thing is, almost every observation that has taken place with these snakes in Missouri and Tennessee that I was able to find out about happened from mid-September to the first week of October, which coincides with the breeding season. And that's when the males are looking for a sexually receptive female, and they are actually looking for the pheromone centrale so they can find a female to reproduce with. So at that juncture, you know, I'm like, okay, it's like I got 2 data points. I know the time to go is mid-September, the first week of October. Also found out the habitat utilization, and also found out the time of day. It was determined that most of the surface active snakes was taking place, observations had taken place in the evening hours, all the way up to maybe up to around sunset. So with that in hand, I figured I was going to go out there and we would have no luck whatsoever, because it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. And at this time, it worked out. Gosh, I mean, literally, it was the first snake of that trip. So, yeah, it was, again, a very surreal experience. It was so nice to see this animal. And no doubt, I'd say the most significant herpetological find in the state for probably the last several years, maybe longer. But really nice. This was a big specimen. It was a male, guesstimate probably around 22 inches long. Next slide, please. Another look at it, but just a beautiful little animal. They feed predominantly on frogs and lizards, maybe small rodents. But so nice to see. So that really brought things together for me. And I guess that concludes this presentation. If anybody has any comments or questions, I'd be more than happy to open it up for a discussion or whatnot. Thank Thank you, appreciate that.
Exactly 1 hour.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Hey, Phil,
Yeah, buddy.
now that you've found all the snakes and stuff, time to switch the turtles now?
Man, I tell you what, I would love